Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Nerd Nights. So a couple quick things. We pay for this venue by you guys buying lots of alcohol, so please do buy lots of alcohol over at the bar. We have grilled cheese guy in the back. Buy your food here. We also have the Oakland Public Library here. If you want more information about any of our talks, or you want a library card, you should go check them out in the back. If you played trivia tonight, please turn in your trivia by the end of the first break. So the break after this talk, please turn it in right to the ticket desk right out in the back. And let's get started. So our first talk is by, hold on. A couple more things. Getting ahead of myself. So we actually do this every month at this venue. Next month, we actually have a couple of awesome talks. We give you guys the opportunity to buy $5 tickets for the next show tonight only. So if you just go to that web link right there, you can actually get $5 tickets for the next show. And again, it looks like a really good lineup. Also, Facebook sucks. So it's getting harder and harder to get you guys to be able to see our events because Facebook throttles our information to you. So we're trying to fix that by ramping up the email list. We're going to send you 2 and only 2 emails a month just for event announcements. That's it. If you text Oakland to 345-345, that gives you the opportunity to add yourself to the email list. We're not going to spam you. We're just going to send you event announcements. And we can all kind of get away from Facebook, which is kind of the most 2018 thing right now. So let's all do that. Also, please check out our Facebook page. We appreciate that as well. Damn it, Zuckerberg, what have you done? So our first talk is by Devin Katayama. So why did we want the people from the Bay talking about making the Bay and making local news? So we have a bit of a crisis right now. So this, I don't know how well you can see these numbers, but this is basically the daily circulation for the Sunday and the regular papers. And even though the population is going up, and I don't know, I would argue that news is getting more complicated and more intense every single day, readership's going down. And so like some of the national papers are doing well, but a lot of the local papers are not doing well. And this is actually like a real news crisis in terms of understanding what's happening here. To think about how big a deal this is. So, this is how many people, almost 40,000 people work in the industry in 2017. This is way, way, way down from like 15-ish years ago, right? And so all these people that used to go to City Hall and they used to go to the meetings that were, had things to do with your lives, those people don't exist in those jobs anymore. And that's a real crisis of understanding how the world works here. This isn't just the main newspapers. It isn't just the Chronicle. The alt weeklies, they actually do a lot of the stories that don't get a lot of mainstream press coverage, right? Like East Bay Weekly is actually there's things there that you would not read anywhere else. And even their circulation is way down from where it was like a decade ago. They also do great things like name us the best lecture at a bar. So they're doing God's work, people. So how do we fix this? So as newspapers are starting to decline in terms of the size of their newsrooms, there's this other avenue that you can get really good and really local news. So like just in the last 5 years, you're getting this doubling of the amount of people that listen to podcasts. And really, what are podcasts good at? Podcasts are good at getting you to get deep into a topic and pay attention for 15 minutes, right? And our culture is not great at paying attention anymore. Like, you follow Twitter and you think you're informed. Oh, hey, there's another tweet. So I think one of the things that the Bay does really well is it grabs onto stories that don't always have the most mainstream press, but it actually gets you to pay attention for like 8 or 12 or 15 minutes, and you know way more about it and things that actually affect your lives day to day. So please welcome to the stage Devin Katayama from the Bay.
Thanks, Scott. All right, so how the Bay gets made.
Brian Anderson is a political reporter for the Sacramento Bee. He also sends out the Capital Alert newsletter. To subscribe, Brian Anderson is a political reporter for the Sacramento Bee. He also sends out the Capital Alert newsletter. To subscribe and to
Okay, so it's not a pretty process, but it's fun. Brief history of the Bay. This is a picture of me from the 1920s. And Radio was really strong in the 1920s, and it's been strong for decades. This picture could have been taken a few years ago because radio is actually still a pretty strong news medium. Public radio especially has also been pretty strong, even though other news media has dipped, as Scott mentioned. But we do know that people are getting news in different ways, on demand, online, and we know that podcasts are one way that younger audiences, new audiences, are consuming content. I think a recent study showed that 12 and up have 17% of people 12 and up have listened to at least one podcast in the last week. So this is something that KQED and public media is in a perfect position to produce. We already have amazing people working on audio, and they know exactly how to make it. And you're starting to see this more and more with public media. And KQED, I think it's safe to say, is the first public media station to try to do a daily news podcast the way that we're doing it. So super excited about that. There's a lot of different ways to think about what news podcasts are, and if you can see up here, you might recognize some of these podcasts. There's various. This is somebody from BuzzFeed produced this, and it just gives you a sense of like what the mood of these shows are. So topic-driven and highly produced, such as The Daily, such as Reply All, such as NPR Up First. Personality-driven, raw, meaning two people maybe in a room that doesn't have great production. So it's all over the board for what we could do with a daily news podcast or a news podcast. I like to think of us somewhere in between topic-driven, highly produced. I wish we were a little bit more personality-driven, and that's on me. So we'll see how far we can take that later on down the road. So what is The Bay? If you don't know what The Bay is, it is a news podcast. It's about 10 minutes. It drops 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday right now. And this, when we first started thinking about what we wanted to create, we were thinking of things that we definitely wanted to try to get into each episode that were important to us. And us is a 3-person team, Erica Aguilar, who's sitting right over there, and Vinny Tong, both producers who I work with. We knew that we wanted every single story to uniquely and directly affect the Bay Area residents. A lot of times local news will take something that's happening on a national scale, and it kind of gets lost. We wanted our stories to be hyper-local as much as possible. We also wanted it to be interesting, something that younger audiences and podcast audiences are demanding, are that it is interesting. And people will drop off. We have data that shows people will drop off the second it starts to not be fun. So that's something that we go for as well. And it drives towards this point, this twist, or this central question. If you listen to a lot of media, you could talk for hours about any specific subject. What we try to do with our short episodes is get to a single point or get across a single idea in each show so that you could really take it with you when you have conversations out in the real world. So how do we choose our stories? This is just a thing that I threw into one of these online word processors or whatever. I basically took every episode we have, which is over 90 now, and I took a look at what the topics were that we covered. And these are just, the bigger the word here, the more that we've covered these issues, and some of them, as you can see, are overlay each other. But housing obviously is a big issue, courts are a big issue, and so the way we decide what stories we're going to tell is we obviously follow the news every single day. We're very aware of what people are publishing and what our own reporters are doing, and we basically curate the story that we want to tell. And this is very much up to Vinny, Erica, and I, and me, and so it's really from our point of view, our curation, which is really special that KQED has allowed us to do this, because we have these really deep conversations every single day about why we're choosing a particular story, and we're always refining why we're choosing particular stories, and we'll get into that in just a little minute. So we choose our story. Let's say somebody from KQED wrote this amazing or produced this amazing radio piece, or we know they're going to be producing it in the next week or so, or maybe a newspaper writer wrote something just awesome that we know we have to cover. We treat every single story like a story with a beginning, middle, and end, which again we'll get into in a minute. But once we have our story, we actually start to frame it. So I know it's probably hard to see this in the back, maybe not because you have that TV over there, but we start with basically some kind of beginning. We decide how far back we want to go. Does this start with a city council meeting last week? Does it start 10 years ago with a bunch of context that we need to get into before we actually explain what the news is this week? So we frame it very much like this with bullet points, and we hit major parts of what we want to get to. This is a story that we did earlier, I think this month, on San Francisco water and how it's pretty defensive of its water rights because it has amazing water from Hetch Hetchy. And so once we have it framed, then we really start to think about it in terms of a story. And we think of the lead, or we think of the beginning of the episode as that starting place. So here's an example from one of the stories we did.
A pilot for the California Highway Patrol was flying over Napa County back in October. He saw a glimmer of light in the hills, so he checked it out. This was when he first saw the fire near Atlas Peak Road in Napa.
There's one way in, one way out.
This is KQED's Suki Lewis. She told me this story. The winds were picking up, and they were about to get worse, and he knew.
This is going to be a life-saving situation, not a firefighting situation.
The pilot makes a call to CAL FIRE right before 10 p.m. Dispatchers were getting flooded with calls from people reporting fires that would scorch hundreds of thousands of acres in Northern California.
So we do this for a couple of reasons. One of the main reasons is that interesting part, that captivating part. We feel like we really want people to be in the scene and to be hooked on the story. Luckily, again, we have these radio producers that are going all over the Bay Area and collecting all this sound. A lot of the times they come back and they run a 4-minute feature that runs on KQED, but they have all this context and all this other part of the story that they haven't told, and so we help them basically tell that story. If they don't have a natural story with people who they talk to, or they went on scene, or they were at the city council meeting, we can create narrative, and we do this a lot. We can create it by actually going to a scene. We can create it by asking the reporter how they found the story, which we do often. This is one example of transportation editor Dan Brecky and I wanting to talk about Regional Measure 3, which is increasing bridge tolls around the Bay Area. And the way we normally might do this in radio is just have Dan come in, talk to him in the studio, and then that might just go out as a conversation on air, like we're in the studio. But I wanted to go meet him at his house and try to do something creative. We didn't really know where this is heading, but I knew we wanted to take a casual carpool into the city to maybe even talk to people who were our carpool drivers to see what they knew about Regional Measure 3. And this was the beginning of that adventure.
So people line up, cars pull up to pick up riders, and whoever is at the head of the line gets into the first car that's stopped, and people behind them in line will go to the following cars. I offer the driver $1. Many passengers offer the driver $1. And this will be our car here. They're probably going to the Civic Center.
Dan and I get into the first car in a line of cars and ask if it's cool if we record. Luckily, they're listening to KQED, of course, and they say sure.
All right. Yeah, actually, could you turn it down? Thanks. So I'm Devin Katayama, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Hey,
Hi.
nice to meet you.
This is Dan Brecky.
Yeah. Hey, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm David Zlatchin.
David.
And Tiana Wertheim.
All right, so we're in the car. We're on the casual carpool with Dan Brecky, David, and Tiana. Do you all know about the bridge toll on the ballot measure? The ballot measure?
3? I don't.
No, me neither.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we go.
Okay.
Here we go. We're going to tell them a little bit about it.
All right, so then we went and proceeded to talk to them about Regional Measure 3. And this is just another way of doing similar things that we've done in radio all along, but we're really thinking about ways to captivate an audience, to make people care about these issues that are easy to oversee, or they're very easy to kind of bypass. We want to kind of capture your attention. A lot of this is new to the reporters, even at KQED, but certainly new to the newspaper reporters who we asked to interview. We really take our time with them to create that narrative, to craft the story, and to think about parts of the story that they may not have put in their piece that we want to get in there. And so once we have the story, once we have it framed and we book the guest, then is the interview. And the interview is a little bit of a performance. We try to get people warmed up. And most people play ball, and it's really cool. So this was Brian Anderson, a Sacramento Bee political reporter. And I'd never talked to him before, but I knew with a lot of these newspaper reporters, sometimes it's hard to get them in the mood and to have them play along. But I noticed that he had something in his bio where he memorized the alphabet aerobics, and I asked him to repeat it back to me.
It's 2 minutes long? All right.
Okay. Wait, is this going live? Is this going in
We're
the
not a live
podcast?
show. We're not a live show. That's the only thing I can promise you.
Okay. Well, okay, so the alphabet aerobics, here you go. Okay. It goes, artificial amateurs aren't at all amazing. Analytically, I assault, animate things, broken barriers bounded.
I mean, it's pretty impressive. So once you get the reporter kind of warmed up, then you basically walk through the story with the reporter based on the framing that you have laid out. And the idea at the end of the day, and what we're doing with Brian here, is trying to get reporters to be real. Try not to have them sound like they're just a talking head. Try not to have them sound like they're just another person on the radio that it's easy to zone out to. And we've been successful at doing that, and I want to play this one example of, again, transportation editor Dan Brecky. This is Perry Foster, somebody who he reported on a while ago. He was homeless, and Dan got a tweet this year that Perry Foster had died, and he did a story on Perry Foster.
You've talked to a lot of people on the streets for various stories, and sometimes you really connect with people, and they really go deep, and it may surprise you how deep you both go.
Right.
How did it feel? Like, what went through your mind when you got that tweet?
Well, there was probably a little guilt. You know, maybe I could have helped him. You know, maybe I could have helped him, and now I can't. I mean, I think I missed the opportunity to connect with him, and boy, you know, it's final.
There's something, there's something real about Dan in particular, but when you hear reporters open up and when you hear them describe what something was like or describe what it felt like to be at a protest or at a city council meeting, and you know that they have the context and analysis to trust them enough to believe what they're saying, that's the type of stuff that we're trying to pull out of reporters that traditionally we haven't been putting on the radio, or they don't like to talk about when they're getting interviewed by a particular show. But we at the Bay, and I think podcasts in general, especially news podcasts, feel like there is a certain amount of knowledge, liberty that we can take with the context that they have. And so a big part of our job is pulling that out of reporters who are traditionally hold a lot of what they actually know in for themselves. And we do a fair amount of directing. We interview people for about 30 minutes, which I'll explain in just a second, but we do tell people what we want to hear. Like, let's say they just said something that was really good, but they didn't say it quite right. We will try to direct them to get there. And so this next clip is Guy Marzorati, who's a political reporter for KQED, and we needed to take this bigger context of what was happening at the state and bring it to the city of Berkeley, because that's where our whole story was going to take place. And so we had him do a couple takes. Bum, 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 bum. Music, break.
Or I could
Just
say,
do a couple.
Yeah.
Throw it to it.
we know what Berkeley's going to do. We know what Berkeley could do. And
Do we know what any other city's going to do? Or how about this? What city is doing something about this?
Berkeley.
Yeah, so I think that's the one we used. So we basically interview reporters for anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes, and then we cut that down, and then we go through a series of edits as a group of 3, and we do the first edit. The first editor takes it down to about 10 minutes or so. That's the goal. So this is what a 30-minute interview looks like, cut down to roughly 10, 12 minutes. A lot of edits in there, right? Like, that's a lot of editing going on. But we basically want to cut it just right so that every single part is crucial to the story and leads you from one place to the next. So that's where we're at when we get to 12 minutes. We continue to do group edits. This is I think that's a real picture of us. We did a couple fake pictures of us pretending to be happy at the very beginning when we were doing a lot of promotion. But I think that's a real picture. Right, Erica? Yeah? We're no longer in this studio, but that's a separate story. But we do a bunch of group edits, and once we do a certain amount of group edits, then usually Erica takes it, and she starts making it sound pretty. She starts adding a bunch of sounds, pretty much any sound we could find. Reporter sound, sound from online, from news clips, and this is basically exactly what you're about to hear from the beginning to end.
What were people telling dispatchers?
They were reporting transformers blowing.
Possible transformer blew in the area.
People were reporting seeing a flash, a blue light, and then a fire starting. Electrical lines down that were sparking.
So that's that. Yeah, is it done? Okay. So once we have the sound in there, and once we keep doing edits, we may do anywhere between 3 to 6 listens and chopping. Then what will happen is we'll figure out what I need to actually read, and then I'll go into a booth and I'll track all the rest of the stuff. So I'll track the lead, I'll track the outro, I'll track any other context that we decide needs to go into the piece that the reporter didn't say, or that I might be able to say more concisely. And this is a quote from Erica. Tracking booths are like toilets because a lot of people get pretty nervous when somebody's looking at them and they're trying to track and read something. I don't like anybody looking at me when I track my stuff. So I kind of just go in alone and do my business, and that's the toilet thing. So the Bay is relatively new. We launched in March, and we're actually doing a retreat this week. So we're meeting to discuss how the show is going, what we want to do with the show, do we want to make any changes. But one thing that we've been tracking that's very important to all three of us are a number of things, and among the most important to me are the number of reporters of color who we have and the number of guests who are women. And that is because, as you may know, the media women and people of color are vastly underrepresented in media. And part of what we hope to do with podcasting and with getting more younger audiences who are hungry for this content is to make content that's either largely been neglected or talking about issues in ways that have not been talked about before. And so when we're choosing stories at the very beginning of the day, we're keeping in mind why we want to tell that story. And usually it's a story that we want to hear ourselves. So this is something that's super important to us. And we also track geography, and as I showed, we also track like topics that we're discussing. But this is, I think, the beauty of podcasting in this moment. We gotta get to decide who our audience is. And podcasts right now, in a way, are pretty niche audiences. And the more popular podcasts have very direct audiences who they're talking to. We're a little bit more broad, but that's something that we're consistently thinking about and talking about. So, thank you so much for the time up here. I just want to say a couple of things. One is that if you haven't subscribed to the Bay, please subscribe, and please leave a rating and a comment. It actually does help other people find the show. But I am not good at a lot of things, and one of them is saying thank you to people when I am done interviewing them. For some reason, people say I come off, what is it, like condescending, or I don't know what it is. I don't try to be. So now, the Bay, we all do multiple takes of my thank yous because I'm bad at it.
Leslie, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, I'll do one more. Leslie, that was great. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, so with that, I'll take some questions. Any questions at all? Yeah. If we transcribe one of our episodes, it would be pretty short. Is that what it is? The transcription would be decently long, but yeah, we take on topics very directly. So whereas like a newspaper article might go into a lot of the details, which is great, podcast audience and audio audiences have different attention spans, and so we kind of really target the heart of the story and give just the context that we need. And that's been true for radio as well. If you listen to radio stories, they won't include specific numbers a lot of the times, or they won't include the formal name of the committee, because they really want listeners to be treated like they're just being talked to. And so yeah, we do take out maybe a lot of the smaller details around, but what we hope we add is more of the feeling that you get out of being at a council meeting, being inside a protest, whatever the story is that we have. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
So given that you said that you tend to edit stories pretty heavily,
Yeah.
and you tend to guide interviewees a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
how do you balance out a certain bias that might come into that process?
So the question is, how do we balance out the bias that might come into having an interview, but then also guiding that person, and then also having the final say on the edit? So the first thing I'd say to that is that almost everybody that we talk to is a reporter. So the bias, we find ways to add in the context that's needed through them. If I was interviewing a city council person and they didn't have that part of it, which we have done interviews with people who aren't reporters, then it's our job to go in, either add that into the conversation, that's research that we'll do beforehand, or we actually add that in post-production, which we call a step aside. And if you listen to the show, you'll notice occasionally it sounds like we're no longer in the interview. Sometimes we use music, sometimes it's just, I sound more like I'm talking directly to an audience. But that's the context that we try to add into our pieces. The bias question is a pretty interesting one also, just because podcasts are generally seen as like they're more liberal in a lot of ways when you listen to them, especially the news ones. And so there's this question about how me can I be in the podcast, and what does that actually mean to a listener? Do we trust that the listener knows who I am and knows the jokes and knows my sarcasm, and does that even come across? But that's definitely something that is new to all of us, and that's new to people making podcasts as well, is what is that line, and how much can we use of ourselves and what we know to put into the story. So I love the fact that we can pull certain things out of reporters that they wouldn't put into their story, but it's a truth and on its own. They just have been taught a certain way and have been told certain things that's how they've been trained. So it's a little bit of a gray area. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. So the question was basically, how do you take a hyper-local story and then broaden it out to a larger audience, either probably Bay Area, but also potentially state? Every story that we like to also say, I didn't put this in one of the 3 things that we try to get into every story, but we try to take hyper-local stories that have more significant impact around the Bay Area. So, I mean, one easy example is a rent control measure that's happening in Mountain View or Concord or anywhere else around the Bay Area that you don't normally hear a story from. That could be pretty relatable all over to the Bay Area. So that's one way we try to do it. We also try to add that context in and choose stories based on what the national or regional conversation is. So, a couple of our stories are hyper-local things that happen specifically in Oakland, but they are kind of Bay Area-esque in a way, like coffee shops that won't serve police officers. That conversation's happening on a national level, but that's something that's very, very Bay Area. And so we try to choose stories that have that interest, have that national conversation to it that the Bay Area is a big part of in a lot of ways. One more question, if anybody has one? Yeah. Oof, man. What do we do differently now from when we first started? First thing is that we went from 4 days a week to 3, because it is a lot of work to do this. We'd actually like to be at 5 days a week. So that is one. Another one, Erica, what do you think? So initially we thought we would be doing light lift stories that we could pull off more quickly. Nobody on the team wants to do that. They want to put as much effort in, for whatever reason, to every single story, meaning that we add as much audio and production to it, which is why you hear music and all those audio clips. Another option is for us to have a conversation like you hear on the radio, and we've never gotten to the point where we've done a bunch of beta episodes like that, but we haven't done it for real yet. So one thing is that we just went harder instead of easier on ourselves. But yeah, all right, cool, thanks.
Let's hear it for Devin.
work in even really complex environments, lots of different trees, and produces really nice images. So that's basically it. That's everything I wanted to show from this particular subset of measurements. This is only a tiny little portion of what we do at the lab. So I've also included one of the obvious things that we could do is, well, instead of walking around with these instruments, why don't we put them on platforms that allow us to greater access to places like drones or aerial drones or unmanned robots. We, of course, are working on this. In fact, the team that leads this drone project is sitting right over there, so if you want to bother him, be my guest. But this is just a video of essentially the same type of idea. This is a radiation detector. In this case, it's not Hemi. It's a different sensor, but the principle is the same. It still has the LiDAR on it. We strap it on a drone. This is a test measurement. They're flying out in Idaho National Labs in the middle of nowhere in Idaho, where they set up a distributed gamma ray source, and they're going to measure it with this drone. And as we go along here, you will see that. I just want to show you guys what it looks like when it starts reconstructing, because it's pretty cool. So this is the view of the person who's standing on the ground, 8 times speed. So you're basically just standing there with your tablet while this thing is doing a pre-programmed flight around the area, and you can see the radiation distribution being reconstructed while you're standing there. It's super cool. Yeah, and that's it. Can't wait. From the guy that booed me? Oh. I'm sorry, I can't see you. Isotope identification. The short answer is nuclear physics. So just like essentially radioactive nuclei, atomic nuclei have a shell structure, just like the shell structure that you see in atoms. And so when nucleons within the nucleus decay, they jump between discrete energy levels. And so in that case, you see that energy is a single discrete energy. So if you're sensitive to what the total energy is, you can tell which transition that was, and then of course which nuclear state it corresponded to, which corresponds to a specific nucleus. So that's really how the identification works. Yeah, it's the energy of the gamma ray particle. It's fine. Potential commercial application? I'm sure. I don't know. If you look at like somewhere like Hanford or something that they've been cleaning up for 50 years on like a however many billions of dollar budget a year, like I'm sure we could get a slice of that pie. Yeah. But whether or not that's how useful it is, like I do truly think that the technology is useful for some of these cleanup applications, just because of how much faster and potentially safer it makes things like decontamination planning. So yeah, potentially. Yeah.
So they scrape off the topsoil and then what? They put it in a bag in a mountain?
Yeah, so the question was, what do the Japanese do after they scrape off the topsoil? What they do long term, I'm not sure. But when we were there, we saw the giant bags of topsoil that they had scraped off. It was, just like bags of leaves that you see outside people's houses. They're just big stacks of bags full of dirt. In terms of where they actually put them, what they do with the bags, I'm not sure. I'm sure someone knows. But yeah. Last question. Sorry. What's the limit on how small the detectors, the gamma ray detectors could get, and how cheap they could get? That's a really interesting question. In terms of size, they can get very small. Unfortunately, the sensitivity to gamma rays also scales with size. So you want, the bigger you are, essentially, the more likely you are to have a gamma ray interact. So there's a trade-off there. You can make them extremely small, but that doesn't necessarily help you. In terms of price, what the fundamental limits are, I have no idea, but they're really, in my opinion, no one wants to buy a radiation detector. If you try to buy a radiation detector, you'll typically get like 1930s technology, like a Geiger-Müller counter that was invented in 1930 and it still costs $500. So there are no market forces here. Nothing is driving the price down. So yeah, in terms of limits, who knows? I would love for them to be cheaper, and that's actually something that I personally am very interested in working on. Tricking someone into giving me money to do so is another question.
You're hanging out down here. So thanks. So Ross is going to be down here if you have any questions that didn't quite make the cut. We're going to take a 10-minute break. This is your last opportunity to get grilled cheese. More importantly, it's your last opportunity to get the tomato soup that's over there. Please buy it so that Michael brings it next time he's out here too. We're going to announce the trivia winners after this break. Again, 10-minute break, and we'll be back with Lo talking about ticks. We're also going to put up a slide that has the number that you text Oakland to get on our list. See you in 10.
babies. That's another really wonderful thing about them. Their body temperature is too low, so they're great to have around. All right, so blood-sucking assholes. My name's Lo. I'm here to talk to you guys about ticks. I brought some notes. Everyone else is like just able to talk off the fucking cuff, but that's not what I'm here to do. All right, cool. So anyway, I have presented at Nerd Night before, but I'm not a tick expert, so I just wanted to start out by saying that. But I did want to come and talk to you guys tonight anyway. Okay, so what can ticks teach us about all kinds of stuff? Well, you're gonna fucking know. Okay, so like I said, I'm not a tick expert, so what qualifies me to talk to you guys about ticks? Literally nothing. I'm not an entomologist. I've never taken a class about bugs. I'm actually really scared of bugs. But last year I pulled a tick off my leg when I was in Sinol, and I was really horrified, but I also was really interested, and I wanted to know more about them, so I did a lot of studying about ticks. And I will say that even though I'm not a tick expert, I do work as a volunteer naturalist with the California Center for Natural History. Yeah, thanks. A lot of those people are in the house tonight, so right on. Right on, CCNH. And we could talk more about that later. So anyway, I don't know a ton about ticks per se, but I do know something about California ecology, so hopefully you guys will be kind when comes time to answer questions. Okay, so ticks are in the news a lot, and I love this. This is just a couple of random headlines that I've seen in the past few months and weeks since I've been researching the topic, and my fucking favorite is, have we reached peak tick anxiety? So I don't know, but maybe you guys can answer that at the end of the talk. So, okay, so I think ticks are pretty interesting. They're obviously in the news a lot. They've been on fucking John Oliver. He did a little bit about ticks finding and fucking their mouse mates on Tinder. That's pretty good. Seth Meyers had a little bit about them, so it's not just me. And maybe it's not just you. Maybe you have questions about ticks. So I think it's great that they're getting a lot of publicity because there's a lot to know about them. And I think it's great that we're raising a little bit of awareness. And it's also great because I get a couple of free drinks. Thanks. Thanks, guys. Okay, all right, but why do you guys care about ticks? Do you care about ticks? I don't know. Well, I kind of have a two-part thesis tonight, which is that, one, ticks are fucking gross. They're just absolute total fuckers. But, but two, they're really interesting. And I think that if we study a little bit about ticks, we might learn things about other topics. So I'm going to talk to you guys tonight about things like microbiology and conspiracy theories and climate change. So it really kind of runs the gamut. So hopefully, even if you think ticks are fucking assholes, which they are, you still think they're interesting. That's the point of my talk tonight. So I'm not really doing a deep dive. It's kind of like a big general overview. All right, so I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about what ticks are, because you might look at that thing and be like, what is that? It's like a total nightmare. But it's an arthropod, so I'm going to throw some jargon at you. So arthropod means a couple things. It means that it has a hard outer body, so things like insects and bugs and spiders and lobsters, they have that hard outer shell. But it's also even more closely related to arachnids. So if you got close enough to count its little legs, it does have 8, so it's an arachnid. And broadly speaking, there's 2 big categories of ticks, soft body and hard body. That's confusing. Anyway, we're talking about the hard body ticks, which is the family called Ixodiae. And this particular guy on the screen is the one that's one of our local ticks. This is a Pacific black-legged tick. So ticks are really gross, especially because they're parasites. And parasite means something really specific. So you all, as people and as animals, most animals, they have to eat stuff. And most animals, when they eat stuff, they actually have to kill it. But parasites don't have to kill what they eat. So the parasite feeds on what it's eating, so that's called its host. And these are specific parasites that need to eat blood, but they don't kill their host. So they feed on you, or they feed on a mouse, or they feed on a deer, and then they're done. But you might think like, well, but yeah, they carry all these diseases. Like, they do kill things. But no, they don't kill things. They are a vector, which means they carry diseases in them. So they're really famous, especially for carrying Lyme disease. But that's not all. Here's some other awful shit that ticks can give you. It's just gets worse. Okay, so here's one. Oh, I should also say, there's so much shit that ticks can give you. Like, the list would be really long, and it wouldn't be great for a presentation. It'd be a little text heavy. So I just picked a couple of really nasty ones. So it's a parasite called babesiosis. And this parasite acts a little bit like malaria. It infects your red blood cells. So over here, this picture is what happens to your red blood cells when they're infected with the parasite. You can kind of see that they explode. And that's bad for a blood cell because your red blood cells are supposed to carry your oxygen, and if they explode, oxygen's not going to get around in your body. So that's called hemolytic anemia. And that can range in severity, but it's never good. You don't want that. Okay, so here's another one called Powassan virus. It's relatively new. I couldn't find a micrograph of what the virus itself looks like, which also brings to mind that so many of the different diseases that are carried by ticks are so newly discovered, a lot of them just in the last 20 years. So there's not a ton of research about them. There's also not a lot of good blood tests about them. So if you're receiving blood from a donor, it might have some weird shit in it. Have we reached peak tick anxiety? Okay, so this one's called Powassan, and it's mostly in the Northeast, so you don't actually have to worry about this one yet. But what it causes is encephalitis and brain damage. And there's a serious chance of mortality, but the really scary thing about it is that it can be transferred from a tick to you in just 10 minutes. So the tick just has to be on you for 10 minutes, and you could get this virus. That sucks. Okay, but the weirdest one is probably a meat allergy. I'm a vegetarian, so this is not my problem, but this is a problem for a lot of other people, especially if you're living in the southeast where the Lone Star tick is. The Lone Star tick, this little fucker, he or she carries, it's not a disease, it's not a virus, it's not a bacteria, it's actually just a molecule. And it's a molecule called alpha-gal. And when the tick feeds on you, it spits some of what it has in its body back into you. So it spits some of that alpha-gal into you. And your body has now this alpha-gal in it, and it's not something that naturally occurs in our bodies, so we produce antibodies to it. And the next time your body sees that alpha-gal, it's going to kind of alert all those antibodies, like here's this foreign invader, attack. But the problem is that alpha-gal is really prevalent in red meat and dairy. So the next time, so after you've been bitten by a Lone Star tick, the next time you eat red meat or dairy, you could have an anaphylactic shock, which could be deadly. So yeah. Okay, but the thing you guys all have probably heard about is Lyme disease, and we will spend a little bit of time talking about it. So Lyme disease is interesting. It's a bacterium, and it's caused by this spirochete bacterium. They kind of have this spiral shape, and they burrow into your cells, which is so insidious and nasty. Okay, interesting that this bacteria is carried by 2 different species of ticks, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast. They're in the same genus, but they're different species. What else do I want to say about that? Oh yeah, so the spirochete is not from the ticks. The ticks get it from a host that they have fed on, and that's usually a small mammal like a little mouse. And then once they've fed on the mouse, they have that bacterium in them. And the next time they feed on something else, they can transmit it. So some symptoms of Lyme disease. It can definitely affect your nervous system and also your joints and also your heart. So it's pretty serious, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. So let's see what else. Okay, so I want to tell you guys a little bit about the ticks and how they live. Their life cycle is pretty complicated. To break it down as simply as I can, they have 4 stages of their life. So they start out as eggs, and then they hatch into larvae. And those larvae only have 6 legs, and they're really, really tiny. And they feed on small things like mice or birds. After they've fed, they grow. But remember I said they're arthropods, so their skeleton's on the outside. So when they have to grow, they actually have to shed their entire body, their outer covering of their body, I should say. So they molt, and they turn into something called a nymph, and now they've got all 8 legs. And the nymphs are a little bigger, and they're going to feed on slightly bigger things. So they're going to feed on things like, deer and people. And then after they've had another blood meal, again, they're going to grow, and they're going to molt again, and now they're going to become adults. The adults are a little bit interesting. The adult males do not bite people. They don't need to feed again. They're just going to mate and die. The females do need to feed because they need the energy to produce the next series of eggs. So I don't want to go too much into that, but just so you guys have like a kind of a quick sense that if you sort of notice, they tend to only be feeding in the warmer months in spring and summer and fall. And that's true out here too on the West Coast. Let's see. Okay, so how big are these things? It's confusing. I tried to give you guys a banana for scale. So here's what's up. This is a fingertip. That's after it hatches and it becomes a larva, so it's so tiny. Then that's a nymph, that's an adult male, and that's an adult female. So the risk of being infected, you're probably not going to get infected by this guy because they haven't fed on anything that's infected yet. So they probably don't carry any of the Lyme disease. And you're not going to get bitten by the adult male because they don't feed on people. And you might get bitten by an adult female, I did, but they're so big that you notice them. So the primary carrier, the primary vector of Lyme disease in people is this one, the nymph stage, because they're so tiny that you don't notice them crawling on you. It takes about 48 hours for the tick to be on you to transmit Lyme. So, if that big fucker was on you, you would know. But some of the little ones, you might not. They do tend to, how shall I say it? They want to get into your squishy bits, so they're going to be in your pubes, they're going to be behind your ears, they're going to be in your armpits. So those are the places to check. All right, but let's see, what else do I have up here? Okay, but, oh, it's so bad. Okay, so here's a regular tick, and then there's the engorged version. I know, right? It's so fucking awful. Jesus Christ. Yeah, okay. All right, so that's gross. Okay, but I want to tell you what's going on in California, because that's where it gets really interesting. So this is a map showing Lyme disease cases. The blue is the Lyme disease. So right away, two things I want you to notice. So first, we're going from 2001 on my side and 2016 over there. So obviously in 2016, the blue, the reported cases, it's covering a broader area. So what that tells us is like either a lot more people are reporting Lyme or there's a lot more Lyme disease as time has gone on. But the other thing I want you to notice is that like in California and the West Coast, there's not a lot of Lyme disease, but we have the ticks that carry Lyme disease. So what's going on? Some guy over there kind of like, that guy. He spoiled it. He was like, fucking lizards. Yeah, the answer has to do with lizards. Right on that guy. So this is the western fence lizard. It's our most common lizard in California. This is over here, this is an INAT map of observations. So the blue, each blue dot is an observation of where this thing has been seen. Literally, if you've been outside, you have seen one of these lizards. So I'm sure you recognize them. So they're all over California. And so you might notice their range of where they are is overlapping with where Lyme disease isn't. So what is up with that? So the thing about the fence lizards is that apparently they're fucking delicious if you are a tick nymph. So, yeah, so if you've ever picked up a lizard, and like, don't pick up lizards if you're not qualified, if you don't have a permit to pick up animals, don't pick them up. But if you did, or if you Google image searched, you would see that these lizards tend to be infested with ticks. So each of these little blobs is one of those engorged ticks. I know, right? Again, fucking disgusting. So what's going on with the ticks and the Lyme disease and the lizards? So here's kind of the story as I understand it. The ticks, when they're young little nymphs, they're gonna feed on, when they're larvae and nymphs, they're gonna start feeding on things that might be the natural reservoir of the Borrelia spirochete, things like little mice. So the tick has had a blood meal and it has gotten some of that Lyme disease bacteria in it. The Lyme disease doesn't affect the tick, but it still just has the bacteria living in it. So as that tick is going along, if it bit you, it could transmit the Lyme disease to you. But what seems to happen in California is that those nymphs love to feed on these particular fence lizards. And these fence lizards have a protein in their blood that inactivates the Lyme disease. I know, right? So good. So basically they're almost like immunized or cured. And I don't have good data about how, what percentage are cured. I don't know that, so don't ask. But we do know that those ticks that have fed on the fence lizard seem to then not pass on Lyme disease to human hosts. Okay, so that's pretty fucking great. So that sort of explains why even though we have ticks that could have Lyme disease, in California we don't really have Lyme disease. That's not to say people couldn't still get Lyme disease. You certainly can. I also want to point out that people might think, oh great, let me just put more lizards in my yard. Okay, the problem is, one, don't fucking touch the animals. Like, don't move the lizards. I said that already. But the other problem is that the ticks love to feed on the lizards, but that means that the more lizards you have, the more ticks you'll have. And obviously those ticks carry other kinds of nasty shit like we talked about, so don't move the lizards. Okay, so now we're gonna get to like, if you Google Lyme disease, if you Google ticks, you're gonna come up with some weird fucking shit. The internet's weird. These are just like a couple of the conspiracy theories that I've heard that Lyme disease is man-made, specifically that it's a chemical weapon manufactured by the military, especially on Plum Island. I'm from Long Island, which is close by. If it was a chemical weapon that just gave people arthritis, that's a really shitty chemical weapon, so get a better conspiracy theory. But also, people will say it causes autism, it causes MS, it causes dementia. The science is not with you on any of that. None of that seems to be borne out. Lyme disease is awful, ticks are awful, but none of that shit is true. But there's a lot of things that have happened in the history of Lyme disease and the history since we've discovered Lyme disease only pretty recently that have made people really skeptical. So it's sort of fueled some of these weird conspiracy theories. And one of the things, unfortunately, that's happened is that there's no Lyme disease vaccine. But the weirdest thing is that there used to be a Lyme disease vaccine. It was called Limerix. It came out in the 90s, and it came out at sort of an unfortunate time because in 1998, The Lancet published an article which has since been retracted and totally denounced, linking the MMR vaccine to autism. And now we know that that is totally bogus, but at the time, there was an upswell of anti-vaxxer sentiment. And so people were really skeptical of this Lyme disease vaccine. And as a result, they wrote into the FDA. The FDA did a whole bunch of studies. The FDA never found any issue with the vaccine, but basically the market had kind of fallen out because it got so much bad press. So their patent expired, and vaccine manufacturers aren't out here to make you feel good. They're out there to make a buck. So if there was no market, they didn't really care about marketing it to people. But you can still get it for your dog because apparently people were willing to give it to their dogs. So that's a thing. Okay, so I have this thought, and I'm not a biochemist. I guess I didn't say this before. I'm a speech therapist. But I'm not a chemist. I'm not a biochemist. And I just think it would be really excellent if there's anybody here in the audience who does work in biotech, to get some of the lizard blood, find out what's the protein that's inactivating the Lyme disease, and then make a vaccine from that. Anyway. Yeah, right? Isn't that a good idea? Get on it. Okay, so there's a lot of other reasons why Lyme disease is controversial, and I don't have Lyme disease. I've never had it, so I don't want to speak for other patients. But like I said, I am in the medical profession, so I do see patients who have Lyme disease, and it's an issue that is really, really tender for a lot of people. So I want to be very sensitive when I talk about this. But one issue is that patients who have Lyme disease have not felt heard by their providers, who maybe deny that there is such a thing as Lyme disease. Even in California, people were told, oh, you can't get Lyme disease in California. And obviously that's bullshit. But so there's a lot of misdiagnosis, there's a lot of underdiagnosis. The CDC estimates that somewhere between 30,000 and 300,000 people get Lyme disease each year. And that's just a huge spread of people. That's not a good estimate. That sucks. So we don't know how many people have it. We don't know who they are. Another problem is that the lab tests are kind of not helpful to patients. If you think you have Lyme disease, you can go and get tested, but the lab is going to test you for antibodies. So that's going to tell you if you've ever been exposed to Lyme disease. It doesn't tell you, do you have Lyme disease now? And it doesn't tell you, are you cured? And those are literally the only two things that a patient cares about. So the test is kind of not helpful. And then this third issue is that people who have had Lyme disease, some subset of that population do report persistent symptoms, whether those be like joint pain or neurological issues. And their doctors have like not really been on board with hearing them necessarily, because there's not really evidence yet that extended antibiotic treatment really helps them, so there's not really like a financial gain. So that's all sad. And whether that's like fueling the ongoing controversy, I can't say, but it certainly doesn't do anything to diminish it, because now there's this antagonism between patients and doctors. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about why ticks are spreading. Do we need to worry more? Or have we reached peak anxiety? And the first, well, really it all has to do with the fact that we're people. And people tend to fuck things up. So the biggest issue probably first is habitat changes. We're making our environment into places where ticks love to be. On the East Coast, those ticks seem to prefer the suburbs, and it's fucking full of suburbs out there. I'm from Long Island, so I can attest. And on the West Coast, the ticks here seem to prefer wide open spaces, and we're all about preserving open spaces. So we've done things that just happen to make the ticks really happy. But another really big issue is that humans are contributing to climate change. So if you remember that map that I showed you between 2001 and 2016, where the ticks are spreading, the ticks are spreading because now they can go places where it used to be too cold for them. It used to be, in the winter, they don't usually feed. But now it's not really winter time in those places. They can stay out and feed on creatures longer, and they can also go to places where maybe they wouldn't have gone before, like Minnesota, where it would have been too cold, but now it's not too cold for them. And then the last thing is they seem to just be having this weird cultural moment, which I can't fully explain, but I can totally capitalize on. Again, thank you for the free drinks. Thank you to the bartenders. Tip your bartenders. Okay. So that's basically what I want to tell you guys. I hope you guys come out of this just hate ticks all goddamn day. They still suck, but I hope you still at least found something interesting, whether it's like ecology or microbiology or parasites or climate change or conspiracy theories. I feel like there's really something about ticks for everybody, and I'm happy to take your questions. I have a couple other slides. They're more like resources and stuff, but I wanted to take this second just to give a shout out that, again, I'm not an expert, but that means that you guys could give a Nerd Night talk. I just found a tick on my fucking leg and wanted to give a talk about it. So maybe there's something you want to do. The folks that run Nerd Night, Rick and Scott, are super helpful. So this could be you up here giving a talk. All right. Okay, so I want to give a couple quick shout outs. Our buddy Eddie runs the Insect Science Museum of California. He's an awesome entomologist. Ask him the questions about bugs. The Bay Area Lyme Foundation is a group that actually does real research about Lyme disease in the Bay. They're a good resource. And then me and my friends run this group. We're called the California Center for Natural History, and we run adult education for natural history, but especially about California. So come talk to me. I'll tell you about our upcoming events. We do have some tarantula walks. My buddy Tony back there is leading some tarantula walks in a couple weeks. Okay. Yeah, so that's pretty much it, and I'm happy to take your questions, and I'll try to remember to repeat the question. So yes, hi.
So if we exterminated ticks, would there be any grand ecological consequences from it, or would it just be an amazing situation?
Okay, so the question is, if we exterminated ticks, would there be grand ecological consequences? And that is such a great question, and the answer is that every time humans have tried to intervene by like taking some animal out of the ecosystem or like putting a new one in, it's been a bad idea. So we should not tread into that lightly. I believe there's one study going on, maybe either on Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard, so like a very small island, where they're not trying to remove the ticks, but they are trying to make them infertile, or make them so that they can't transmit something. I can't remember exactly. But so they're not even trying to take them out of the ecosystem because it's so impossible for us to understand what are the downstream consequences of taking a whole organism out. We just don't know enough, and to pretend that we do is really, what do you call that? When hubris? Yeah. So yeah, we're not at that stage yet. Do you guys have other questions? Oh, yeah, person by the bar. What's the best and safest way to remove a tick? Okay, so I have a couple other slides. These are sort of like things I anticipated you guys asking. So here's how to find ticks, and here's how to not find ticks. So if you find it, all right, I don't want you guys to have ticks on you. So you should try to find out a couple of things you can do to not even get them on you, which is one, like know where they are. In California, they are outside, especially in tall grass. Okay, wear clothes that you can spray permethrin on your clothes, or you can get clothes that has it on you, has it kind of baked in. Wear DEET repellent. Try to stay in the middle of the trail so that the tall grass doesn't brush against you. And if you're really willing to go there, you can tuck your socks into your pants. It's hard for me to go there, but okay. And then after you come home, wash your clothes, hot water, and check yourself, like check your armpits, check behind your knees, check your ears, and shower. So if you find a tick, what should you do? Get some tweezers and pull it out. Do not burn it. Do not put some like weird lotion on it. Don't do anything weird. Just pull it out. The longer they're in there, they are gonna burrow into you. And I didn't put any pictures up because it's fucking gross. But you can do it. Like steal your reserve, get some tweezers, and pull that shit out of you. Pull it straight back. If you want, there are services where you can save the tick and send it in to be tested. Yeah, do you have another follow-up question? Yeah. Wait, what? If you just Google like tick testing, you will find it. There's a couple of different ones. Yeah, cool. Okay, guy who knew about lizards. So the question is, what do ticks like about blood? I actually don't know the answer to that, but blood is full of stuff, right? It's full of cells. It's full of protein. Like, you've got cells in there. It's full of salty goodness, sugar. They're just like me and you. Like, they want all the same things me and you do, which is like sugar, protein, and fat, and they're gonna get that by sucking your blood and your cells out of you. So I don't know specifically. I don't know how picky they are, honestly. They seem to like mammals, but they also seem to really like those lizards, and they also eat birds, or feed on birds. So, yeah. I don't know if I have time for other questions. One more. No? Oh, No, I'm not calling on you. Sorry, it's my boyfriend. I'm not gonna, you can ask me later. Does anybody else have a question? Okay, yeah, hi. Okay, so I just want to say it louder. What this person is saying is that if you have been bitten by a tick, if you even think you may have been bitten by a tick, if you have an unexplained rash on your body, some people do get that bullseye rash, but not everybody. So if you have any idea that you might have been bitten by a tick, do ask your doctor to be tested. There is still this pervasive idea amongst doctors, especially in California, that people in California can't get Lyme disease. That's bullshit. You can. But doctors might not know that yet. But now you guys know that. So you can advocate for yourselves. And if you want to get tested, please do. Early treatment is the best treatment. That's accurate. Yeah, a couple of months of doxycycline, and you're like good as new. Hopefully.
Let's give a hand for Lo.
Thanks, Rick.
Great talk. So I'm sure she's not darting right out the door, so if you have another question, I'm sure you could bug her. We always close the event with some of the things we're looking forward to for the next month. This is quite frankly a really good month. I'm going to focus on that, which I have a slide for, and that. Nite San Francisco, which is kind of where we descended from, is having their 100th show next month. For whatever reason, they're not like big party people, but 100 is a big deal, and the lineup is going to be amazing, so you should go. The thing that I was teasing is this. So our friends at Almanac Brewing have cooked up a beer with experimental yeast that was prepared here in the East Bay. So you could go learn about yeast and how it makes your beer. And also, if you missed our event at the Good Hop, now's your chance to hear a talk about beer history in the East Bay from our friends at East Bay yesterday. So go to that. It's only $10, and it's this week. So great deal. Our show next month is really fantastic. My friend and colleague from Sandia National Labs, Jeremy Templeton, is giving a talk on how we use machine learning to try to understand physics better. If you haven't had enough bugs, we have Lisa Marginelli, who just came out with a book called Underbug. It's a great read. So she's going to talk about termites. And finally, we're going to have a talk from Eric Yates of Hot Butter Rum. He's going to talk about the banjo. Tickets are $5 today only, and then $8 online. Hope to see you next month. Have a great month.